The top stories here on Al Jazeera. Bahrain's opposition groups are expected to put their demands to the Gulf state's crown prince. Anti-government protesters have gathered once again at Pearl Roundabout after riot police left the area on Saturday afternoon. Anti-government protests in Libya are widening. Witnesses are talking about a massacre by government security forces in the city of Benghazi. A doctor there has told Al Jazeera she's seen over 50 dead in the hospital she works in. And in the city of Baida, east of Benghazi, foreign mercenaries have been seen on the streets. Witnesses have told us that they're shooting live ammunition at demonstrators. Hundreds of Libyan Americans have been demonstrating outside the White House on Saturday in a show of solidarity with the Libyan people. Al Jazeera's Kimberly Halkett was with the demonstrators and has this report.
Overwhelmed with emotion. As little by little, reports of fresh violence in Benghazi reached Libyan Americans in the United States. Hussein al-Shafi, a political refugee living in Washington, makes contact with his brother-in-law, who tells him protesters are being fired upon.
He said, people are dying, bodies thrown everywhere, shed blood everywhere, and they have no ambulance to take them to the hospital, to the emergency.
Al Jazeera cannot confirm the authenticity of the reports, but phone conversations like this between Washington and Benghazi are repeated for hours as Libyan Americans gather in front of the White House to appeal for help in preventing bloodshed.
It is violence. This group of Libyan Americans says the White House is not doing enough to stop. That's why they're now calling on President Obama to use his position of power to help bring about change inside Libya.
Obama, you have to stand up. Mr. Obama, Libyans are getting massacred and killed.
The White House Friday did issue a written statement condemning the use of violence by governments against peaceful protesters. But these pro-democracy supporters say more must be done to push Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi to end his rule of more than 4 decades.
For 40 years of fear and viciousness and corruption and horrible violence, both psychologically and physically visited upon the Libyan people. We can't accept that, and we want them to condemn what they're seeing inside of Libya right now.
That is why these Libyan Americans say they will not surrender their hopes. They promise to keep the pressure on the White House until they are confident a free and democratic Libya can finally emerge.
Stop the killing, stop the hate!
Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Mohammed Al-Jahmi is a Libyan-American activist. He joins me now live from Massachusetts. Mr. Al-Jahmi, it's safe to say that you side with those protesters and you're firmly anti-Gaddafi. So let's first talk about the reports of these foreign mercenaries. Do you have an idea or any idea which countries they may have come from?
Thank you very much for having me here. These countries, as I've spoken from Libya, they're to sources in Benghazi. They're coming from Bangladesh, reportedly coming from Bangladesh, and some from Franco-African speaking countries like Chad, Niger, and maybe other countries.
Well, Libya is a country of some 6 million people, and from the pictures that we're getting, we're seeing sort of hundreds protesting. Doesn't this suggest that Gaddafi may still have substantial support among the people?
That is not true. Mr. Gaddafi has built his rule on fear and corruption of moral values. In Libya, the fulfillment of citizen needs are tied to their absolute loyalty to Mr. Gaddafi. And Libyan citizens, as I always mention, are accountable to a vast security apparatus, and that is they're scrutinized by Orwellian institutions, and if they fail this scrutiny, they have to answer the death squads, which are called the revolutionary committees. And so all this statement is true, because right now we get the revolutionary committees are firing at these and killing innocent civilians to protect themselves. According to the U.S. State Department, 10 to 20% of Libyan population work in surveillance activities, and that is so it is the only way in Libya to get ahead is to be in part of the vast security apparatus and participate in this corrupt value stuff. So when you look at the youth in Libya, the youth in Libya is really rebelling at the surface they're looking for freedom and liberty, etc. But they're also at the core, they're rebelling for the old ways of corruption because they're sick and tired of having to sell their souls to satisfy their needs. It's
Mr.
an opportunity for
if I can just jump in there. You've described to us some of the grievances. Let's compare with Egypt. Some of the pro-democracy protesters there, it took something like, I think, 18 days to get their wish of seeing President Hosni Mubarak step down. Yet, in just 5 days in Libya, we've seen something like 100 people killed. With all these deaths, is it really worth continuing the protests?
Well, it is the Libyans realize that after 42 years of absolute rule by Mr. Gaddafi, that freedom is not going to come easy. In addition, comparing Mr. Gaddafi to Hosni Mubarak is like apple and oranges. We've always known, I've always said that Mr. Gaddafi, at the core, is his behavior, the moral, his behavior on the inside. It just reflects his behavior on the outside. It's just that's his character. He's known on the international level as a bloody history of terrorism, but Libyans inside of Libya know firsthand that Mr. Gaddafi is a terrorist, commits a lot of terrorism against his own people. That has been for 42 years. Mr. Gaddafi has been brutalizing Libyans. There has been mass killings in the Abu Slim. There have been mass killings toward those people coming from Chad. There's disappearance. Libya is just like North Korea minus mass starvations. I mean,
Mr. AlJazeera,
this is a really nasty regime.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. Mohammed AlJazeera, a Libyan-American activist, joining us there and giving us his thoughts from Newton in Massachusetts in the US. So to Egypt now. The Egyptian Stock Exchange will remain shut on Sunday, marking 3 weeks of closure due to the country's political upheaval. But Egyptian officials say emergency laws will be lifted within 6 months and proposals to amend the constitution are almost ready. Those were among the demands of pro-democracy campaigners who ousted President Mubarak more than a week ago. A survey by South Africa's Medical Research Council has found that 1 in 4 men there admit to having committed rape. The council works with men and boys trying to overturn prejudices and stereotypes about sexual violence. In part 2 of our series on sex crime in South Africa, Jonah Hull looks at how apartheid is partly to blame.
He was beating her, probably raping her as well.
Even now I'm still shaking. Because since I was born, I never heard the kind of sound which was produced by that girl.
South Africa is sometimes dubbed the rape capital of the world.